Welcome to another Bible Q&A. This is for the readings from March 16th to March 31st. Go through the book of Deuteronomy, end of Mark, beginning of Luke's Gospel. So I want to go through some questions from Deuteronomy and then the questions from the New Testament from Mark and Luke. So Deuteronomy chapter 3, it seems boastful, destroying every man, woman, children, but keeping the cattle and all the booty, all the goods. Probably a new translation for that one, in terms of our scriptural translation. Anyways, they seem to have valued goods more than human life. Well, the context there is God is bringing his people in the wilderness, and in the book of Numbers, it gives a recount of they're going through King Sion's land and King Og's of Bashan, their land, and they just ask for safe passage. What do those nations do? They come out against Israel with armed troops, armed men. And so God says, take them out. All right. And then all the goods and stuff are for the Lord. So it's not necessarily that per se evaluating like, well, God, they're just deciding on their own. It's because they came with armored force against God's people. And God says, they're in your hands. Deuteronomy 10, verse 6, here it says Moses died at Masera and was buried there. And Numbers chapter 20, it says he died at Mount Hor. Same place, different names? Maybe. My guess, probably. I can't find any definitive evidence. We don't really have maps, detailed maps from that time period. And one of them could just refer to a region. So Masera could refer to a region, just as if someone said, I live in St. Paul, and someone said, well, and then he said to the other person, the same person said, I live in Minnesota. Well, they'd be telling the truth. St. Paul is in Minnesota. So it's possible that one of these refers to a region, Masera, and the other one refers to the kind of the mountains, Mount Hor, the actual particular location. Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 31, I thought we read before that the tribes were to go no farther than the Jordan. Did that mean they were to stop there? Well, they stopped there before being allowed to enter into the promised land, which the generation, Moses speaks of the generation that were brought out of Egypt. God then sent 12 spies into the land of his the promised land. The spies come back. It's all in book of Numbers, and all the spies except for Caleb are like, we can't take them. No, we're going to be defeated. And Caleb's like, if the Lord wants us to take it, he'll be with us. And that's what the Lord wants. He wants to bring these people in. And so the people cower out. And so that generation isn't allowed to enter. And then later, we will go in now. It's like, well, God's like, I'm not going to be with you now because you rejected the initial, it's going to be with you in, and you guys backed out. And so what it's speaking of here in Deuteronomy chapter 11 is that generation wasn't allowed to enter the promised land. And now the next generation, 40 years later, they're at the Jordan, the east side of the Jordan, which is present day Jordan, the country Jordan, and into the promised land, present day Palestine. That generation, the speech of Deuteronomy is Moses giving them, like they're about to enter the promised land. He's saying, okay, your parents weren't able to enter. They saw all these things from Egypt, God bringing them out of Egypt, and they didn't believe. And so he's preparing the next generation of be faithful. Don't be like your parents, your generation, who cowered out when God said he was going to be with them, but they didn't trust. And so yes, the following generation will enter. So it determines which generation. So, the generation that was brought out of Egypt, they couldn't enter because they cowered out when God said he would bring them in. But the next generation, they're going to enter. And that'll take place in the book of Joshua. We'll hear that kind of them entering the promised land. Deuteronomy chapter 13 speaks of stoning a false prophet to death. I thought there's the commandment, thou shalt not kill. The commandment, thou shalt not kill, actually is thou shalt not murder. That's the more kind of precise translation of the Hebrew, so innocent life. Whereas someone who's spouting out lies, especially saying, God has told us this, and you're spouting it out, like, you're going to cause chaos. amongst the people. I think in our current day right now, kind of information like it's kind of deciphering what is true. Um, it can be frustrating with kind of different news reports and stuff. What's really the full story, real story, and so it's kind of a protection of, well, not just for the truth for the community, that they're not misinformation, as well as someone who's speaking on behalf of God and they aren't. That's serious. You're saying you're a spokesman of God and you're spouting out lies. You're not just sinning against the community. You're also saying God is a liar, in inferring that. So Deuteronomy chapter 21. Verses 10 to 14, it seems it's demeaning for women. So this refers to when they go into, when you go to forth war against your enemies, the Lord your God gives you into your hands, and you take them captive, and see among the captives a beautiful woman, and you desire to have her, and would have her in, and would take her for yourself as wife. Then you shall bring her to your home, and shave her head, and pare her nails. So part of this is kind of, she's breaking off from the pagan culture, kind of nation she was with, and being part of the God's people. So there's this kind of separation, kind of in preparation, enter into God's people. I think it's important that the importance of, you want to take them as your wives, and so kind of he doesn't say, well, you can just rape them and do whatever. No, their dignity. And then even if later on he decides to separate, have her kind of leave the home, separate. He's not to treat her as property, as a slave. And so though it's not perfect, I think in Deuteronomy, many of they seem like these are from God a lot. Well, this is Moses' speech, and so there's a lot of biblical questions of, okay, are these concessions because of the hardness of their heart? Jesus says in the Gospels, Moses allowed divorce because of the hardness of your heart, but in the beginning it was not so. And so in Deuteronomy it speaks of God allowing, or Moses permitting divorce. It doesn't say God commanded that you can divorce. No, it's kind of a permission that seems like Moses made, and Jesus seems to that's what Jesus kind of confirms in the New Testament, at least affirms. So you have these things here. Okay, they're not perfect, but there's a certain level of dignity that's still being. So women, they're not to be treated as property, and the importance of marriage. You're not just supposed to use the nations that you conquer, the women and stuff. No, you're going to enter the importance of marriage and this kind of the certain dignity there. Now, it's not perfect. Okay, I'm not going to, but there's still above what most likely the other nations and stuff, how they would treat captives, and especially women captives. Verses 18 to 21 speaks of stoning a son who's rebellious, stubborn and rebellious. He doesn't obey his parents. Now we have to see in that passage there, it speaks of them kind of correcting him, and he just being stubborn. He doesn't want to be corrected. And then it says, because he's a glutton and drunkard. So essentially he's immoral. He's he's a plague to society, essentially. So it's not just, well, they just kind of got really fed up with him one day, and they didn't like he did something wonderful. No, it's kind of the fact that this is deeply embedded vice. And so it's eradicating vice from the society, deeply embedded vice, stubbornness. Not kind of the perfect thing, but when you don't have a prison system, you don't have certain things, it's like, well, how are you going to keep order in? And so it seems concessions, all right? This isn't the perfect. They aren't perfect, but I think in the situation this is what's to preserve the holiness, setting apart of God's people, of ridding the people of serious sin. Deuteronomy chapter 34 speaks of Moses' death, and it says Moses buried him. Well, who's the he? Yeah, they're asking here. Well, that's a good question. It seems from context that the Lord is the one who buried him. Because then they don't know where he was buried. There's actually a Jewish tradition that Moses was assumed into heaven. So we don't have, I believe Catholic Church said anything definitive on that, but it's kind of, I think the point is they don't know where he was buried, and he didn't enter the promised land. I think that's the key point. He wasn't, his burial location isn't known, and he didn't enter the promised land. So it seems like the Lord buried him, or maybe assumed him into heaven. Okay, going on to the New Testament. Mark chapter 14, it speaks of the man with the linen cloth leaving it and running away. What's that all about? So this is at the end of, during the Passion in the Garden of Gethsemane. It speaks just kind of out of the blue, and it was in the Passion this year. Passion Sunday, the Passion reading on Palm Sunday. It speaks of, there was a man with a linen cloth, and he comes up, and then he's, now there's a couple different theories. Where's this in 52? Yes. They followed him, so, and he runs off naked, or in the South they say neged. There's a couple of theories. I've heard one theory of, well, maybe this is the rich young man who said no, kind of was sad, but now he's coming back. That's one theory. I think a stronger theory is this is Mark, John Mark, who'd mentioned the Acts of the Apostles, who would also be the evangelist. Could be him. There seems to be, and now you're like, well, what's the linen cloth whole thing have to do with, there's, during the time of Jesus' time in the temple, the priests who are on guard, like we have Eucharistic adoration, exposition, or someone has to be there, kind of as a, in God's, when the monstrance with the Eucharist is present. The same thing, there was a similar practice in the Old Testament of the Levites, of the presence in the temple. Now, not before the ark, but kind of in the antechamber of the temple, I guess you could say, or the temple, but not the innermost temple. Only the high priest could go there. But there were kind of had guards. They were to be on guard on different shifts. And if apparently there's Jewish writings, and Dr. Gray, Timothy Gray, in his Gospel and Mark study on Form.org, he mentions this, that there's Jewish writings that speak of if they fell asleep on watch, they'd be stripped naked and have to go home naked. So it's this idea of, there seems to be a connection perhaps of he's not standing with the Lord, and so this kind of shame. It was part of the importance of stay awake, and stay on watch. Well, this young man, he kind of tried to get away. He didn't stay firm. Other than that, it's kind of an enigma. Kind of, there's not a whole lot, but there's some seems to be it's pointing to the lack of whoever this person is, not kind of remaining with the Lord, chickening out, or that's. But it is a curious passage. Mark 15, the temple was torn in two. What does this mean? Well, the veil in the temple, so there's the temple, and then there's the Holy of Holies in the temple, kind of the inner realm. There's the veil would be there. Now behind that veil there'd be the Ark of the Covenant. But at this time, after the exile from Babylon, the Ark was lost. So they don't have the Ark, so it's empty. But on that veil, even though they don't have the Ark in the temple at this time of Jesus, on that there's accounts from Jewish writers in the first century that the constellations of the skies were on there, of the stars of the sky, night sky, kind of so this idea of, and so the heavens, kind of, you're entering, when the high priest would enter each year during Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, kind of enter into the heavens. All right, that was signification. So it's got ripped. After Jesus dies on the cross, that gets ripped open. If you go back to the beginning of Mark, it speaks of at the baptism. The same word is used, to tear, to rip open. The heavens are ripped open. And the Father says, "You are my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased." God, heaven's ripped open. Well, heaven is ripped open for you and me and so the access to the divine. So there's a signification. It's also pointing to the end of in one sense, the kind of ending of the soon end of the temple kind of being surpassed by Jesus, the new temple. The old covenant is being kind of fulfilled in Jesus, who is the new covenant. He's the new temple. And so that's the curtain referring there is the curtain that would be separate the Holy of Holies, the innermost temple, from the temple. So this ripping open of heaven. Heaven is being ripped open when Jesus dies. And John's gospel speaks of him being pierced and kind of his heart being ripped open, you could say, blood and water flowing forth. Luke chapter 1. How is Mary related to Elizabeth? Ages? Good question. Well, we know Mary is probably between 14 and 16, and Elizabeth, she's beyond childbearing years. So, went through menopause and stuff, and so at least 40 plus. We don't know exactly. So in terms, relative, it's relative. Some translations say cousins, but relative, cousins sometimes we think of like similar. Well, sometimes cousins are a lot older, but really relative. How they're related, we're not really given a whole lot of detail on that. And Elizabeth and Zechariah is part of the tribe of Levi. So there's a question. Well, is Elizabeth part of the tribe of Levi, and is Mary part of the tribe of Levi? Or is she of the tribe of Judah? Well, there's no definitive answer. At least I haven't come up with anything on what I've read. Because those are the only really two. The tribe of Benjamin too, yeah. Because most of the other tribes got lost in the exile. So they're. But Joseph is from the tribe of Judah. And so how exactly we're not given the detail. We just know they're related. But there does seem to be some evidence that so you had Jews around Jerusalem, which is where Elizabeth is living, and then Joseph, Nazareth. There's kind of like an outpost in between. There's the land of Samaria. Really, they're Israelites who kind of 500, 600, 700 years earlier before Jesus kind of were intermingled with the nations, and so there's syncretism, kind of some worship the true God, but there's really like pagan practices intermingled in there, and it's not, and so you have kind of a pocket of Israelites or Jews in Galilee and then down in Jerusalem, and there seems to be exactly how that came about. I'm not exactly sure how Mary is related. We just know they're related in some way, at least enough where they go and they know each other's names. But we aren't given the details. So, all right. Well, thank you for your questions. Continue reading the Bible and keep me on my toes. God bless.